We trade more with the European Union than amongst ourselves. Our trade patterns take us to Europe. You go to any, and I'm extremely fortunate enough to travel through the continent. You go to any port in Africa. The rail infrastructure takes you from the port, from the mine to the port. From extraction to somewhere else in another part of the world. This is our fundamental condition that we've been in as Africans for the last 65 years. We've been in this condition. Yes, of course, colonialism, we can blame them, but what is it that we as Africans, should be accounting for being in this condition for the last 65 years? I know I will be criticized for saying this. Fortunately, I'm the second most senior person in the African Union elected by heads of states. So I can say it because I have the electoral capital. They will unelect me if they want to, that's fine. But the point is this, we must accept as Africa, why are we in this condition? Why is it that the panelists are telling us that 18% intra-Africa trade? And you compare that with intra-EU trade, 70%. Intra-North America trade, 65%. Intra-Southeast Asia trade. So what is it that, as Africans, what is it that we've got to do to reverse this colonial economic model which we have sustained? It is us. It's not the Europeans 65 years later, it's us. So the provocation from the panelists is entirely appropriate. Entirely appropriate. Why are we, as Africa, in this condition? The fifth largest producer of lithium in the world is here, in Africa. The transition from combustible engines to electric vehicles is potentially driven by us as Africans. So the proposition that I put to you is that the African Continental Free Trade Area is our last opportunity. We will never, if we miss this opportunity, we will never, as a continent, be able to be globally competitive. This is my uneducated view. We will not be able to be globally competitive if we miss this opportunity, because the World Bank projects that by the year 2035, potentially the African continent is the 8th largest economy in the world. 8th largest economy in the world, potentially with a combined GDP, consumer spending, business spending, 6.8 trillion United States dollars, potentially. If we remain fragmented, if we remain disunited, that projection will remain nothing but a projection. So, it is up to us as Africans to decide, what do we want to do? Do we want to ever be on the periphery of the global economy, sitting on the sidelines of the G8 and the G7 and the G's this and that? Or do we want to say, We actually, as Africans, are the #1 producer of rubber in the world. So what do we say to manufacturers of tires? What do we say to those who use cobalt to power the global economy? In my view, this is what the African Continental Free Trade Area is about. It's not necessarily about me. The free trade agreement and the lawyers who are drafting it and the lawyers who really feel good about seeing their language living forever and ever. It is about industrial development of this continent and integration of the market and looking to where Europe was in 1947. 1947, you know it better than me. 1947, 5-6 countries, European Coal and Steel Pact. On the ashes of the Second World War, and you look at where Europe is today, 72 years later, 73 years later. So, when I make this point, I'm told I'm an evangelist. Perhaps I am, but I want us to think about what is it that we are going to do to advance our continent. And so we have a free trade area that has a very, very wide scope: trade in goods, trade in services, competition policy, investment protection, digital trade, 47 countries, as I mentioned. And there are some who say the Africans are not going to do it. But the political will is there. The commitment is there for us to implement this agreement. So what are the tools? As I wrap up, because as you see, I got this note. What are the tools? Why is this different from any other trade agreement? Why should you pay attention to this? First time ever in the history of the African continent, we have a dispute settlement mechanism to protect investors on the continent. First time ever. It has never happened before. Some will say, well, you know, we don't have a history of implementing trade agreements and commitments. I point to you to the WTO. The largest country in the world, I will not mention it, does not implement commitments under the WTO. So it is not a matter of being African. Dispute settlement, your investments, your interests in a particular market, you will be able to advance your claim and say, country X has violated their obligations. Second, payments, and I will end on this note. Payments, 42 currencies on our continent, $5 billion worth. The cost of currency convertibility, $5 billion. We traded, all of us sitting here, probably you more than me, we traded on SWIFT in 2019, $19.5 billion. We take our money to Manhattan, to London. I was talking to a CEO of a global bank. He told me that, and this is astounding, he has a branch in Rwanda, Gisenyi. He has another branch in DRC. And the distance is about, you cross the border 5-10 kilometers. I mentioned this example before because it is astounding. He's sitting with $65 million worth of transactions in 1 month. But from Gisenyi to Goma, 10 kilometers, he has to use a payment system that takes that $65 million to Manhattan for 3 days. And then 3 days later, 5 kilometers later, the money is in his bank account on the other side of the border in Goma. What is it that we are doing as Africans to reverse this? Because the cost, all of you are sophisticated investors, you can absorb that cost. But the small medium enterprise, how do we expect them to absorb that cost, who are the drivers of Africa's economy, over 60%, creating 455 million jobs in Africa? Small medium enterprises. So, as I close, Madam Program Director, we must challenge ourselves. We must challenge ourselves as Africans. They tell me, he's captured by Afreximbank. Yes, I am. Because I'd rather be captured by Afreximbank, by another bank that I will not mention. Because these are our institutions. So all of us have a particular duty. All of us, private sector, public sector, we have a responsibility to make sure that this last opportunity, we make the most of it. It's not a trade agreement, actually, when you think about it. It is Africa's blueprint. 1947, where the Europeans were, is where we are today.